It's very useful. So this is where we're going to start to get a little bit technical, but you need to understand Python and how it works. Okay, Python is what we call a high-level language. Now, a high-level language is not like a high-level employee in an organization. That doesn't mean it's like the best or in charge or the boss or anything like that. What it means is that it runs at a level of computing that is further away from the processor. What does that mean? Well, every single program you run on every single computer, whether it's your phone or the computer sitting in front of you or anything else, anything that has a computer, has to interact with what's called a processor. The processor does very basic math operations, but it does so many basic math operations at such a fast pace that it almost feels like it's doing more complex things. In order to get your, just make sure that doesn't block the door. In order to get your program, your Python program, to the processor, it has to go through what's called an interpreter. And that interpreter is what we call Python itself. Okay, so this Python that we're talking about, Python is a programming language, but on your computer, Python is another program. And what the Python program does is it interprets. Just like if I was speaking French to you and I had a French and English interpreter here interpreting everything I said to you so that you could understand what I'm saying in English. Now, every time you use an interpreter, something happens to your rate of speech, right? Has anybody ever used an interpreter before or seen an interpreter? You've probably seen those. What happens when I'm using an interpreter? What do I have to do? I have to slow down because the interpreter, I say something, then they say it to you. Then if you say something back to the interpreter and they say it back to me, that round trip of information takes a little bit longer. So an interpreter slows things down. So Python interprets for between our program that we write in Python code and our computer, and then it produces output. So Python manages all of that round trip of information, just like a language interpreter would do if I was using one in class. So the benefit to using an interpreter is that I don't have to learn French. The benefit of a Python interpreter is that you don't have to learn to speak the language that the computer speaks when you're programming. You can program in the friendly, fun, easier to use Python language, and the interpreter takes care of the work for you. Other languages have something similar, but it's called a compiler. A compiler changes the whole program before it's run to the language that the computer speaks. The advantage of that is that it's faster because every time you run that program, it's already in the right language. The disadvantage is that every time you want to make a change to that program, you make a change in the original language, whether it's C or C++ or whatever, and then you have to compile it again. You have to translate the whole thing to the computer's language, and then you can run it. So the development cycle or the ease of use for Python is better because it doesn't compile. All it does is when we run that Python program, Python acts as the interpreter. So the disadvantage of Python is that it's slower than other languages. Is that a problem for us? 99% of the time, it is not a problem. Because when you run a Python program on your computer, the ones that we're going to be doing in class, even at the most advanced stage of this class, the programs that we're going to run on these computers will feel like they're running instantaneously. No lag at all, right? So when is it a problem? Well, I showed you that Google and some of these really big companies are using Python code. If they choose to use Python in an instance where maybe it's attached to a web page that's getting 10,000 hits every minute, or 10,000 people are pulling up that web page or doing something that requires that Python script to do something every minute. All of a sudden, that little bit of difference in speed that we can't tell the difference when we're using on a computer here, that difference in speed is going to make a big difference to Google. How big of a difference? It actually makes such a big difference that the energy cost, the difference in energy usage between Python and C++ at that scale could cost them millions of dollars a month. So it does make a difference sometimes, but only at a huge scale or a very complex program. Okay, the simpler programs, most of the basic stuff that we're going to do in this class, you'll never know the difference. And even when you get to a point where you're programming something where you start to know a difference, you'll still be a long ways away from it being a situation where you have to use a different language other than Python, right? So Python is an interpreted language, not a compiled language. And now you know what that means. It's also called a high-level language because there are layers of stuff. The computer is the lowest level. Every time you put a layer of stuff in between the language and that computer, an interpreter or a compiler or whatever, it becomes a higher level language. So a highest level language is always an interpreted language like this. Okay, so it's time to dip our toe into what we're going to be doing first. And the first thing we're going to be doing with Python, the way we're going to approach programming, is called procedural programming. Now, throughout this class, we will discover or talk about some other ways of approaching programming, but the simplest, most basic way to think about programming is procedurally. What does that mean? So, when we're talking about procedural programming, when we write code, each line of code is in order. Okay, so when I run a program in Python, if it's written procedurally, it will start at the top, the first line, it will run that first line. Then it will run the second line. Then it will run the third line. It will go line by line through the program until it reaches the end. And then when everything has been executed, all of the lines have been executed, it will stop. So what does that look like? Let's, and you can join along with me if you want, but I'm just going to open up a file for playing around here. Okay. So I've got my PyCharm open here, and this is something we learned to do, right? We have a print. So this is like what we did in assignment 1, where we printed hello world. There's only one line of code, so there's only one command here to follow. But when I run this, what it does is it just does what I said. That doesn't really give you a feel for procedural code yet, but let's add some more lines. Okay, so I'm adding another line of code. And another. Okay, so I have 3 lines of code. And in a procedural program, what's going to happen is it will do the first line, and then the second line, and then the third line. So when I run this, that's what it does. It follows each line one at a time. If I have a problem with my code, like this, maybe I left off one of the quotes in that second line, you can see there it's underlining it. But when I run that, what you'll notice is it doesn't run my code because certain kinds of errors don't allow the code to even start. Now, if I do something like this, if I have a variable name in there, what's a variable? We'll talk about that in a minute. And I run that code. That's a different kind of error, and you'll notice that that error doesn't actually cause the problem until after it runs the first line. You can see it still says hello, and then it gives me the error. So you can see it's going through the program one line at a time and doing what it says. When I get an error on line 2, it does not do line 3. When I get an error, the program stops, or what we call crashes. Okay? So this program crashes because I have an error on line 2. So that is what procedural programming means. When I say procedural, we're talking about one line at a time, go all the way down, stop when you get to the end. So in our code, let's take a look at what's going on here so that we can sort of dissect this. So when I print hello world, there's a few things going on here, and we need to understand what they are. So I have two parts to this code, okay? The two parts. The first part is print. Now print is what we call a function. We're going to get a little bit deeper into functions here in just a minute, but a function essentially is a command that does something in Python. Okay? Print is pretty easy. Like I said, it uses natural language. What does it do? It prints. It prints to the screen. So print is a function. You'll notice that functions are usually a word followed by parentheses. Sometimes the parentheses are empty. They don't have anything in them. Now, if I do that with print, I might get an error if the something in the parentheses is required, but it might just do nothing. Okay? Other functions have empty parentheses, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Print is pretty useless without the stuff inside the parentheses. Other ones, that's okay to have it empty. We always have to include the parentheses though. Even if they're empty, a function always has to include parentheses. That's part of what Python uses to recognize that that is a function or a command. The other part of this, you'll notice, is the words hello world with an exclamation point in quotation marks. Now I'm using double quotes. Single quotes do very similar things, but this is what's called a string. A string, sometimes known as a string literal, is called that because when we put something in quotes like that, we are saying we want it to look literally. We're using literally that stuff. Now, what do you see up here? You see two words and punctuation, maybe a sentence even, a greeting. Like we have meaning that we assign to those words. Hello, hello world. We know what that means because we speak English. Python doesn't understand the meaning of what's in those quotes. What Python sees is a list of characters. What do I mean by that? It sees lowercase h, lowercase e, lowercase l, so on, a space, and an exclamation point. It sees those characters in that order. That's all it knows about it. They could literally be any characters in any order, but it will always keep those same characters in that order in that string. We cannot change it. Okay, so why does that matter? We'll find out. So when we put those things together, when we say print hello world, what we're saying is print these exact characters in this exact order to the screen. That's all we're saying. It's pretty much the simplest thing you can do in Python, which is why we started with that.